Hi, this is Andrea Kane. Here, sounds like my voice is going a bit. I'm here with you for HIT 445, which is quality management, and we are still on week 2, but we have moved on to chapter 6. This is a very brief chapter. It's about communicating PI activities and recommendations. If you want to follow along in your book, I'm on page 95, actually flipping to 96 as we speak. Our objectives are to apply communication tools such as minutes, quarterly reports, and presentations in the PI process, and recognize key elements that need to be in a PI presentation, and even critique a presentation layout. And you're probably asking me, why do we even need to do this? Well, guess what? In HIT 945, if you happen to be in that this semester, you will be doing sort of a presentation for your showcase, and some of this information might be helpful, even though what you're doing is not necessarily performance improvement. All right, flow of information from chartered PI teams to PI and Safety Council. Notice that performance improvement has to be reported up to the board of directors, and it also goes through the medical staff executive committee. Before it gets there, there are other places that it goes. It starts out as agendas, then you have your meeting. It gets turned into meeting minutes that record what happened at the meeting and what's going to be followed up. From there, it becomes part of the PI team reports and their presentation. And that information then gets funneled up usually to an organizational senior leader type level performance improvement and patient safety council that may or may not have patients on it, may or may not have physicians on it, may or may not have the CEO on it. And then it goes up to the med exec committee, and it's shared sometimes at medical staff department meetings, depending on what the PI was. And then it gets funneled up to the board. So it's very important information. Minutes. I wish they would start with agenda. I don't know why they didn't start with an agenda, but before you have a team meeting, you need to have an agenda. You need to know what you're going to be covering and that sort of thing. And then you need to have your minutes. You keep track of what happened at the meeting, what your progress is. Sorry, my mouse is going a little crazy on me. And it's usually done with these with these follow-up or these conclusions. I'm struggling a bit for a way to communicate this. As you do the minutes of the meeting and as you're going through the meeting, as you're leading the meeting, each agenda item needs to have a conclusion, a recommendation, an action, or a follow-up. Every single one. So if it's on the agenda or it gets added to the agenda at the meeting when it's brought up under old business, new business, other questions, comments, concerns, every single item has to have a conclusion, a recommendation, an action, or a follow-up. And so in your minutes, you're going to have a column, and whoever's recording your meeting is going to put in there, okay, here's the conclusion, or here's the recommendation, or here's the action, and who's going to do it, when, how, where, and that includes the follow-up. Quarterly reports. I wish they hadn't put in quarterly, but I guess that it's because a minimum of reports should be done on a quarterly basis. At a minimum, you have to report on a quarterly basis. But the truth of the matter is you can report, if you're talking about a rapid improvement team activity, you're going to report out as soon as that is over. If you have a group that has a charter and they have to be done within 3 months, you're not going to have a quarterly report. You're going to have your final report by the end of that quarter. So I see where they're coming from with this. At a minimum, they want you to produce a quarterly report. But I have to admit that if your PI team has gone on past 3 months and you don't have a significant report by that point, I would kind of question the value of that performance improvement activity. Now, what they also may be referring to here is the fact that most organizations have a PI committee, organization-wide, and they usually meet every 3 to 6 months, and they go over all PI activities that are happening across the organization. And in that case, each team submits a blurb about where they're at with their PI activity. They may say, we are in our first month, we've met, and here's what's going on. They may be in their third month and be saying, we're wrapping up, we should have a final report in the next 2 weeks, but in the meantime, here's a summary of what we've found. Or they may come to this quarterly organizational PI meeting and do their presentation there, rather than doing it separately. I worked for an organization that as soon as the team wrapped up with what they were doing, they wrote up their final report and gave a presentation to the organization, and they opened it up to absolutely everybody, anybody and everybody that wanted to come. Whether they had anything to do with the PI or not, they would come for the presentation, to show support and to learn about what was going on in the organization. So, for instance, if materials management found an innovative way to manage resources, even housekeeping, even physicians, even senior leaders, even HIM, anybody and everybody would show up to that presentation and see exactly how that PI process went and what were the outcomes and what would be happening going forward. And then when the organization had their PI Safety Council meeting, then it was just mentioned as a blurb that they finished and they provided their presentation. So it just depends on the organization and how they want to play the PI game. But you need to make sure that you do keep documented meeting minutes, and the PI Safety Council, like anything else, has an agenda, has meeting minutes, and has a report that then goes up to the next level, whether that be senior leadership or whether that be med exec or whether that be to the board. Storytelling. Yes, storytelling. You are reading a book called Hardwiring Excellence by Clint Studer. And I am hoping, I know it's early days yet, but I am hoping that you are enjoying the storytelling in that book. If you look in your textbook on page 100, it talks about storytelling and what are some elements to successful storytelling and methods of storytelling. Organization, structure, timeliness, frequency, connection, celebration, feedback, those are all elements to storytelling. I would argue that you have to have an integral part to the story in order to tell it. If this is just a story you're repeating that you're not a part of, I would say that the success of that storytelling might be a bit diminished. But when you're a part of the story, as you will find as you go through Quint's book, because he tells stories that he was directly involved with, they have such a power to them. And I think that makes them a little more successful than just repeating something someone told him or something he read about. And I would argue it's the same way for all of us. If we were telling a story that happened to us personally, I think we would communicate it much more successfully than a story that we just picked up in a book. All right, so I'm not going to linger on that, just something to know. Methods of storytelling. Storyboards are one of the most common. I would say storyboards and PowerPoint presentations are typically used together in many ways, and they are a very effective method of storytelling when you're talking about healthcare organizations. In fact, the healthcare organization I worked at in North Carolina, where we did just awesome PI work as an organization. We're very advanced in that. We were trained in Lean. We did rapid improvement cycles. We did just amazing stuff with PI. That was very different than the hospital organization that I worked at here in Iowa. They were much more, I would be kind and say, in their infancy. or perhaps mired in their rut of contentment, or that's the way we'd always done it. But anyway, we use storyboards throughout the week. We built them as we went through our PI process. And so at the end of the week, it was fairly easy to come through with a conclusion storyboard. And then it was very easy to build the PowerPoint presentation from the storyboards. But sometimes people do it the opposite way. Sometimes people create the PowerPoint presentations and then use those to create the storyboard, and there's nothing wrong with that. That can be very powerful as well. So it just really depends on who is your audience, what are you communicating, how are you communicating it, to who are you communicating, are they in person, does this need to be electronic, will you be videotaping, or will people be able to see up close your storyboard? It just depends. Effective storyboard presentations. Yes, you want to map the board with labels for each section. You want clean boards. You want to keep detailed information outside of the boards, available for reference, but not necessarily on the board. Because too much information, it gets too busy, they lose attentiveness and those types of things. And then you plan the presentation to fit the size of your storyboard, and that varies depending on how big your storyboard is. At the organization in North Carolina that I talked about, we had very, very large dry erase boards, white dry erase boards, and we had Post-it note paper, white Post-it note paper that was huge, maybe 3 feet by 5 feet. It was just incredible. And we would put it up on those whiteboards, and we would fill it out as the week went by, as we were doing our PI team activities, and for some of the rapid cycle improvement activities. And then we would be able to use those to then either turn the whiteboards into storyboards or get storyboards that fit on there and put those up. So those were some really cool things we were able to do there. Above and beyond the electronic presentations that we did, because we always did an electronic presentation as well. And that we usually videotaped the electronic presentation so that it could be put forward and sent out so that everyone in the organization could be aware of it. And then it was also helpful then to go out to the medical staff and others. Use large fonts. You definitely want to do that. Make sure that people can read from a distance. You want to be creative with color and other visual enhancements, but be careful you don't use too much. When you use too much or too bold in some ways, it can be overwhelming, and people get distracted by the color or the visual enhancements rather than by the content. So just be careful. Color is really good, really important. Visual enhancements such as clip art or other designs or graphs or things, those are really important. You want to have those, but make sure that they aren't over the top distracting. And then effective electronic presentations, headers for each section, titles easy to read, wording is clear and succinct, font is large enough to read, make sure you leave some space, organize the layout, and this is just a sample storyboard layout. And unfortunately, I did not hang on to any of the PI presentations that I have done throughout my career. To me, the information belonged to the organization, so I never kept anything like that. I regret it now in the sense of it would be really cool to be able to strip off the organization's information and have the content that wasn't confidential to be able to share of some things that worked really well. But hindsight is always perfect, is it not? Benefits of storytelling: you document your team accomplishments, you present the PI work that you did as a team, you inform employees of organizational issues and resolutions, you create empathy, you recognize quality work, And this last one, if your board of directors doesn't know a great deal about your organization, including the performance improvement activities that are going on, I would say you have a major problem with your senior leadership team, because the board of directors should know almost as much about the PI activities that are going on in the organization as your senior leadership team. And if your senior leadership team doesn't know, you've really got a problem. All right, and going back to that comment, I have seen that in an organization or two that I have spent some time in. I will tell you, the ones where the board of directors are as committed to the organization as the senior leaders, and they're knowledgeable. It is such a pleasure and such a joy to work for that organization. It's really awesome to see, and especially when they include the medical staff and everybody's working together. A great synergy. All right, so report cards. These present data on an organization's performance, looking at pre-established sets of criteria. And that is on, where is it? I know I saw it. Maybe I didn't. I don't know. Let me go back to that. Report cards. This is on page 102. Just a tiny little blurb here under toolbox technique. Yeah, every place has report cards. If we haven't already gone out and taken a look at physician compare and hospital compare, we will do that at some point, I'm sure, and you'll be able to see some of those quote unquote report cards. But most organizations have those, and they're looking at how are we doing compared to external benchmarks. I also want to draw your attention to page 103. There's an example of a PI poster presentation. Alrighty, that is it for chapter 6. I'll be back to talk to you about chapters 8 and 9 shortly. Thanks.